All right, so we're diving into Philippians 2, 1 to 11 today.
Okay.
And, a lot of people have heard this passage before, maybe even preached on it.
Many times, probably. Yeah.
But we're going way deeper here.
Absolutely.
We've looked at a ton of sermons from all different kinds of pastors.
From all over. Yeah.
And what we're looking for are those really interesting nuggets.
Yeah, the golden nuggets that we can use.
The stuff that's not just the typical Sunday school answers.
Right, exactly. We want to go beyond the basic level platitudes.
Exactly.
And really see what kind of fresh perspectives are out there.
So one of the things that really jumped out at us was how many pastors focused on this Greek word kenosis.
Right, right. It's a word that doesn't get used in everyday language.
Right.
But it's a really powerful concept.
It is.
This idea that Christ emptied himself.
Yeah.
It's a level of humility that's almost impossible to grasp.
It's so much more than just like be humble.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
One pastor actually described it as like a theological diamond because it's not just what Jesus did.
Right.
But it's the whole mindset behind it.
Yeah, it's the motivation.
Yeah.
It's the heart behind the actions.
So how did these pastors take this idea of kenosis and actually apply it to their congregations?
Well, that was one of the things that I was really curious about, too, because, just telling people, be more like Jesus.
Right.
It's not
That's
exactly...
not super helpful.
No, not very practical.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I saw that was really interesting was how some pastors connected this idea of submission to freedom.
Ooh.
They argued that letting go of that need to control everything can actually lead to a deeper sense of peace and purpose.
That is fascinating.
Yeah, it's a kind of a paradoxical concept.
Yeah.
But it makes sense when you think about it.
It kind of flips the script on how we usually think about submission.
It does. It does.
It's not about being forced to do something.
Right.
But it's about choosing to surrender to something greater than yourself.
Exactly. And it gets even more interesting when they tackled the topic of pride.
Okay. How so?
Well, one pastor I saw actually quoted C.S. Lewis.
Interesting.
He called pride the complete anti-God state of mind.
Wow.
And he went on to compare it to trying to build your own kingdom in direct opposition to God's kingdom.
So it's not just like being a little bit arrogant. It's like a fundamental rebellion.
It's a rejection of God's authority.
Wow, that's a powerful image.
Yeah, it really is.
But sometimes people need more than just words.
Sure.
They need illustrations.
Right.
Something that's really going to stick with them.
Something concrete, something they can visualize.
What were some of the more memorable illustrations that you saw these pastors use?
Well, some of them were surprisingly vivid, I have to say.
Okay, let's hear it.
One pastor compared selfish ambition to cotton candy.
Okay.
He said it looks impressive, you know?
Yeah, all big and fluffy.
Exactly, but it's mostly air.
It's empty calories.
Right. And then another pastor said that small acts of selfishness in a church are like the Death Star's weak spot.
Oh, I like that one.
Yeah.
A little Star Wars reference in there.
Had to sneak that in there.
That's a word.
But it makes a good point.
Yeah.
One tiny flaw can bring down the whole structure.
And it's not just about like the big dramatic sins.
No.
It's those little everyday choices that we make.
Exactly.
They can either build up unity or tear it down.
And speaking of unity,
Yes.
one pastor used the image of a NASCAR pit crew.
Oh, nice.
Everyone working together seamlessly for a single goal.
Yeah.
It highlights how unity isn't just about good intentions.
Right.
It takes coordinated effort and a willingness to put the team's needs above your own.
Love it now.
Yeah.
We all know that Philippians 2, 1 to 11 is often used to talk about joy.
Right. It's a very encouraging passage.
But some of these pastors really went beyond just telling people to be happy.
Yeah, they dug a little deeper into what true joy actually looks like.
So what do they say?
Well, one pastor argued that true lasting joy actually comes from a specific order.
Okay, what's the order?
Putting Jesus first,
Right.
others second, and yourself last.
Interesting.
So it's about aligning your priorities,
I see.
not just chasing fleeting emotions.
So it's not about denying ourselves joy.
Right.
It's about finding it in the right place.
Exactly, finding it in the right source.
That's a really important distinction.
Yeah, and another pastor I saw actually dug into the Greek text.
Oh, wow.
To show that the encouragement and comfort that Paul mentions,
Yeah.
they're not conditional.
Interesting.
They're already present for believers.
So it's not like we have to earn them.
No, it's a gift.
It's a promise.
Exactly.
That's a really powerful message of hope.
It is, and it's especially powerful when you consider that Paul was writing this letter from prison.
That's right.
So he's not talking about some abstract concept of joy.
He's living it out.
He's experiencing it in the midst of suffering.
And that brings up another important point.
What's that?
These sermons didn't just focus on what the passage said,
Right.
but they really explored why Paul said it.
The context is everything. You can't really understand the passage without understanding the context.
So how do they bring out that context?
Well, one pastor I saw really highlighted that prison context.
Right.
He said, here's Paul in chains, and yet he's writing about joy.
It's incredible.
And unity and humility and service.
It really makes you rethink those concepts.
It does. It does.
It's not just theoretical.
Yeah.
It's something that could be lived out.
In any circumstance.
Even in the midst of suffering.
Right. And another pastor I saw pointed out how back then submission wasn't really a choice.
Right. It was enforced.
It is enforced, yeah.
But Paul was calling for something different.
He was.
He was calling for a voluntary submission.
Yes.
Born out of love.
Exactly.
Love for Christ.
And love for one another.
That was a radical concept for the time.
It completely reframed the idea of submission.
It turns it from a burden into a beautiful act of service.
It does. It does. Yeah, it really changes the whole dynamic, doesn't it?
It does, but it's one thing to talk about these big ideas in theory.
Right.
But it's another thing to actually live them out.
Yeah, that's the hard part.
So how did these pastors bridge that gap?
How did they take those big ideas and make them practical for their congregations?
Exactly.
Well, one pastor used a really relatable example.
Oh, I like examples. What was it?
He talked about a 2-year-old's defiance.
Okay.
And how it's actually a lot like our own resistance to submitting to God's will.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, we've all seen that.
We've all been there.
The terrible twos.
We all have that inner toddler.
Oh, yeah.
Who wants things their way.
Who wants to be in control.
Exactly.
And I think we see that play out in our churches, too.
Oh, absolutely.
That need to be in control to have the last word.
To be right all the time.
To get our own way.
It's that same kind of pride that C.S. Lewis was talking about.
Oh, yeah. That's good. It all ties together.
It does. And another pastor brought up this idea of empty glory.
Empty glory. Okay.
He actually compared it to that cotton candy analogy.
Oh, yeah.
It looks impressive, but ultimately it leaves you empty.
Yeah, it's that fleeting sense of accomplishment.
Right.
That comes from chasing selfish ambition.
Exactly. And it's so tempting in our culture today.
It is.
To chase after those things.
Success, fame, fortune.
But ultimately it doesn't satisfy.
So how did these pastors encourage their congregations to not chase those empty things, but actually live out this passage?
Well, one pastor shared this amazing story.
I love stories.
About a Chinese rice paddy farmer.
Okay.
And instead of watering his own field first, he would always water his neighbor's field first.
Wow.
And eventually this act of selflessness actually led to his neighbor's conversion.
That's incredible.
It's a beautiful example of how living out the principles of Philippians 2:1-11 can have a ripple effect.
Yeah, it goes way beyond ourselves.
And it's not always about these big, grand gestures. Sometimes it's just those small acts of humility and service.
That can make all the difference.
Exactly.
But let's be honest for a second.
Sure.
Even we struggle with these concepts sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. We're all human.
So what advice did these pastors have for those of us who are, struggling with selfishness and pride?
Well, one pastor talked about the importance of repentance.
Okay.
And he said it's not just about saying sorry.
Right.
It's about making a conscious decision to turn away from those patterns of selfishness and pride.
It's a change of heart.
It is, and he actually compared it to the check engine light in a car.
Oh, I like that.
It's a warning sign.
That something needs to be addressed.
Yeah, you don't just ignore it.
You take it to the mechanic.
You get it fixed.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
And another pastor talked about the need for transparency.
Okay.
He said, we can't really connect with others if we're hiding our flaws and struggles all the time.
That's so true, especially for us as leaders.
Yeah, we need to be authentic.
It creates that space for vulnerability.
Which can be incredibly healing.
Yeah.
And of course, forgiveness.
Yeah.
Several pastors emphasize the need to forgive others.
Even when it's hard.
Even when it's really hard.
Yeah, because holding on to resentment
bitterness
just poisons us.
It does. It eats away at us from the inside out.
So we have repentance, transparency, forgiveness.
Those are some powerful tools.
But how did these pastors tie all of this back to the big picture?
To the ultimate goal of living out Philippians 2:1-11.
Exactly.
Well, many of them pointed to John 17,
Okay.
where Jesus prays for unity among his followers. And they argued that by embracing humility, by serving others, by letting go of pride,
We're actually fulfilling Jesus' prayer.
We're participating in his mission.
It's not just about following a set of rules.
No.
It's about responding to Jesus' heart.
It's about being part of something much bigger than ourselves.
That's beautiful.
And another pastor connected Philippians 2:1-11 to the Sermon on the Mount. He talked about the upside-down nature of God's kingdom.
Where the first are last.
And the last are first.
Where true greatness is found in humility and service.
It's radical, but it's also incredibly liberating.
It is. It takes the pressure off.
It does.
So for pastors and Bible study leaders out there, this deep dive has really given us a wealth of resources.
Absolutely.
Historical insights, theological connections, practical illustrations, real-life applications.
It's all here.
It's all in this passage.
And it all comes back to that central theme of kenosis.
Emptying ourselves.
Putting others first.
And ultimately reflecting the heart of Christ.
That's the goal.
It's a challenge, but it's a beautiful invitation.
Yeah, it's a challenge and a privilege.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, as we've been talking about all these different sermons and all these different perspectives, what do you think is like the one big takeaway?
The thing that we really want people to remember from this deep dive?
Yeah, like if you had to sum it all up in one sentence.
I think the biggest takeaway for me is the power of context.
Oh?
You know, these pastors didn't just explain the passage.
Right.
They brought it to life.
Yeah.
By exploring the historical setting, the cultural nuances.
Yeah, all the things that were going on around Paul.
Exactly. Even Paul's own personal circumstances.
Yeah, being in prison.
Right. It added so much depth to their teaching.
It's like, you know, you look at a painting and you can see this surface level, but then when you understand, like, the artist's life,
the techniques they use,
the historical context, suddenly you see all these layers of meaning.
Exactly, things you might have missed before.
And for those of us who are preaching and teaching,
right,
that's so valuable.
It helps us connect with the heart of the passage. Yeah. And then communicate it in a way that resonates with our audience.
So as you prepare to teach or preach on Philippians 2:1-11, think about this. How can you bring out that kenosis,
that self-emptying,
others-focused mindset of Christ?
Yeah. What illustrations are going to resonate with your community?
What stories, what analogies, what examples?
How can you connect this passage to the real lives and struggles of the people you serve?
Yeah, make it real for them.
Exactly. And, you know, we've only scratched the surface here.
Oh, yeah?
The source material we looked at is packed with even more insights. Cross-references, thought-provoking questions.
This deep dive has given you a treasure trove of ideas.
It has.
Now go and make them your own.